After I sold my farm for 80 million, my daughter-in-law threw me into the chicken coop thinking I was broke. When the French lawyer arrived with the keys to my castle, she had to run away. Listen to my story until the end and comment from which city you're watching me. That way I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Margaret Eleanor Whitmore, and I am 78 years old. Everything started when I made the decision that would change everything, selling the family farm that had been in our bloodline for 4 generations. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rolling fields as I stood on the wraparound porch, clutching the final sales contract in my weathered hands. The buyers, a development company, had offered me an astronomical sum that left even the real estate agent speechless. $80 million for our ancestral land. My late husband Thomas would have been stunned, but I knew he would have understood. The farm had become too much for an old woman to manage, and the offer was simply too extraordinary to refuse. My son Robert had passed away 3 years prior in a tragic car accident, leaving behind his wife Patricia and their twin daughters, Emma and Sophie. Patricia had moved into the main house with me after Robert's death, ostensibly to help care for the property and provide companionship. However, I had grown increasingly aware that her motivations were far from altruistic. Patricia was a woman of 35 with sharp features and calculating eyes that reminded me of a hawk surveying its prey. She had married my son for his prospects, not his heart, though Robert had been too smitten to see through her facade. Since his death, she had made numerous suggestions about selling portions of the land, liquidating assets, and modernizing what she called our outdated lifestyle. Her constant complaints about the isolation and her obvious disdain for farm life had worn thin my patience. The day I announced the sale, Patricia's reaction was peculiar. Instead of the joy I expected from someone who had been pushing for this decision, she displayed a curious mixture of satisfaction and barely concealed greed. She immediately began making plans for what she assumed would be her inheritance, discussing renovations to the main house, private schools for the girls, and expensive vacations. Her presumptions were both amusing and infuriating. What Patricia didn't know was that I had spent weeks researching investment opportunities with my longtime financial advisor, Harold Pemberton. Harold had been managing modest family investments for decades, but when I contacted him about the farm sale, his eyes lit up with possibilities I had never imagined. During our private meetings in his downtown office, he presented me with an opportunity that seemed like something from a fairy tale. A medieval castle in the Loire Valley region was being offered for sale by a French nobleman who had fallen on hard times. The property, Château de Montclair, had been in the Beaumont family for over 6 centuries, but required extensive restoration that the current heir could not afford. The asking price was exactly $78 million, leaving me with $2 million for relocation expenses and initial renovations. Harold had connections with international real estate lawyers who could handle the complex transaction discreetly. The castle was magnificent, even in its current state of elegant decay. The photographs Harold showed me revealed soaring Gothic towers, elaborate stone carvings, vast halls with vaulted ceilings, and gardens that once hosted royalty. It was everything I had dreamed about during quiet evenings reading historical novels by the fireplace. The property included 40 acres of vineyards, a functioning wine cellar, and architectural details that had survived wars, revolutions, and centuries of political upheaval. Harold arranged for the transaction to be handled through a series of international trusts and shell companies to maintain absolute privacy. The French legal system, he explained, was particularly accommodating to foreign investors who wished to preserve historic properties. My new legal representative would be Monsieur Jean-Claude Dubois, a prestigious attorney from Lyon who specialized in high-value real estate transactions for international clients. While these arrangements were being finalized over several weeks, life at the farm became increasingly unbearable. Patricia had begun treating me like an unwelcome guest in my own home, making snide comments about my age, my supposed financial limitations, and what she perceived as my declining mental faculties. She started rearranging furniture without permission, discarding family heirlooms she deemed worthless, and making plans to convert the property into what she called a modern living space. The breaking point came on a particularly humid evening in late summer. I had spent the afternoon in town finalizing some paperwork with Harold when I returned to find Patricia hosting a dinner party for several of her friends from the city. They were drinking wine from Thomas's private collection, laughing loudly on the front porch and discussing their plans for the property as if I had already died. One woman, a blonde socialite named Victoria, was particularly vocal about how they should put the old lady in a nursing home and finally bring this place into the 21st century. Patricia noticed my arrival and approached me with a glass of wine and a condescending smile. "Mother Margaret," she said, using the title she knew I despised, "we need to have a serious conversation about your living situation. The girls need stability, and frankly, this arrangement isn't working for anyone. I've been researching some lovely assisted living facilities that would be perfect for someone in your situation." Her friends nodded approvingly, as if my displacement was a foregone conclusion. Victoria added, "It's really the most sensible solution. You'll have professional care, and Patricia can finally make this place livable." Their casual discussion of my future, as if I were merely an inconvenient piece of furniture, was the final straw. I maintained my composure, smiled politely, and excused myself to my bedroom. That night, I called Harold and accelerated our timeline. The castle purchase would be completed within the week, and I would be leaving immediately afterward. Harold arranged for a private moving company to pack and ship my personal belongings, while Patricia was away visiting her sister. I took only what was truly important: family photographs, my jewelry collection, Thomas's watch, a few precious books, and the antique music box that had belonged to my grandmother. The next morning, Patricia delivered her ultimatum with theatrical flair. She knocked on my bedroom door at 7 in the morning, already dressed in her exercise clothes, looking every inch the woman who had decided to take control of her circumstances. "Margaret," she announced without preamble, "I've made arrangements for your transition to Sunset Manor. It's a beautiful facility with excellent care, and you'll be much happier there. The moving truck will be here this afternoon." I looked at her with the patience of someone who had endured 7 decades of life's surprises and disappointments. "And where exactly do you expect me to live until these arrangements are finalized?" I asked calmly. Patricia's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Well, temporarily, you could stay in the old chicken coop out back. I've had it cleaned up a bit. It's quite cozy, actually, and it will give you time to adjust to the idea of downsizing." Uday, her casual cruelty was breathtaking, even for someone whose character I had long since measured and found wanting. The chicken coop was a small wooden structure that had been unused for years since we had stopped keeping poultry. It contained a single room with a dirt floor, no insulation, and gaps in the walls that let in both cold air and various insects. Patricia had indeed cleaned it up by adding a camping cot, a kerosene lamp, and a bucket for washing. It was a deliberate humiliation designed to break my spirit and force my compliance with her plans. I spent 3 days in that miserable little building, enduring Patricia's satisfied glances and her friends' poorly concealed amusement at my reduced circumstances. Emma and Sophie, my granddaughters, were clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but too young and intimidated by their mother to protest effectively. 8-year-old Emma snuck me sandwiches and blankets when Patricia wasn't looking, while 10-year-old Sophie wrote me little notes expressing her confusion and concern about why Grandma was living outside. During those 3 nights, I lay awake on that uncomfortable cot, listening to the sounds of my former life continuing without me. I could hear Patricia entertaining her friends, playing music loudly, and making phone calls about her future plans for the property. She had clearly convinced herself that I was financially destitute and completely at her mercy. Her mistake was assuming that an elderly farm woman couldn't possibly have the resources or intelligence to outmaneuver her. On the fourth morning, I woke to the sound of an unfamiliar vehicle in the driveway. Looking through the chicken coop's dirty window, I saw an elegant black sedan with diplomatic plates. A distinguished gentleman in an expensive suit was stepping out of the vehicle, carrying a leather briefcase and looking around the property with the air of someone conducting official business. This was Monsieur Jean-Claude Dubois, though Patricia had no idea who he was or why he was there. I watched from my humiliating accommodation as he approached the front door and knocked with the confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with important matters. Patricia answered the door in her bathrobe, clearly annoyed at being disturbed so early by an unexpected visitor. Through the chicken coop's thin walls, I could hear their conversation quite clearly. Monsieur Dubois spoke English with a sophisticated French accent, and his manner was formal and courteous. "Good morning, madame. I am looking for Madame Margaret Eleanor Whitmore. I have been informed that she resides at this address." Patricia's response was immediately defensive and proprietary. "She's not available right now. She's between living situations. Is this about some sort of debt collection? Because I can assure you that any financial obligations are not the responsibility of the family." Monsieur Dubois seemed puzzled by her response. "I beg your pardon, madame, but there appears to be some confusion. I'm here to present Madame Whitmore with documentation regarding her recent acquisition of Château de Montclair. This is a matter of considerable legal importance that requires her immediate attention and signature." The silence that followed was profound. I could practically hear Patricia's world crashing down around her as the implications of the attorney's words sank in. Château de Montclair was not some modest property transaction. Even someone with Patricia's limited knowledge of international real estate would recognize that French chateaux were properties worth millions of dollars. "I'm sorry," Patricia finally stammered, "but there must be some mistake. Margaret, Mrs. Whitmore, she just sold her farm and she's practically penniless. She's been living in our chicken coop because she can't afford proper housing. There's no way she could have purchased a chateau." Monsieur Dubois consulted his paperwork with professional precision. "According to my documentation, Madame Whitmore completed the purchase of Château de Montclair for the sum of $78 million American. The transaction was finalized yesterday, and she is now the legal owner of a 16th-century castle with 40 acres of vineyard property. I have traveled here specifically to present her with the deed and keys, as well as to arrange for her immediate relocation to France." But the crash that followed was Patricia dropping her coffee mug on the porch floor. I could hear her breathing becoming rapid and shallow as she processed this information. $78 million, a castle in France. Her carefully constructed plans for inheriting and controlling my supposed poverty were evaporating before her eyes. "Where exactly is she?" Monsieur Dubois inquired politely. "This documentation requires her signature, and I have arranged for a private aircraft to transport her to France this afternoon." Patricia's voice was barely a whisper when she replied, She's in the chicken coop, out back." The shame in her admission was evident even through the walls. I decided it was time to make my appearance. I had dressed carefully that morning in my best dress, the pearl necklace Thomas had given me for our 40th anniversary, and my most elegant shoes. My white hair was perfectly arranged, and I carried myself with the dignity that Patricia had tried so hard to strip away. When I emerged from the chicken coop, I looked every inch the wealthy property owner I had become. Monsieur Dubois was clearly shocked to find me emerging from what was obviously a decrepit outbuilding, but his professional composure never wavered. He approached me with a respectful bow and extended his hand. "Madame Whitmore, I presume. I am Jean-Claude Dubois, your legal representative in France. I have brought the documentation for your chateau, as well as arrangements for your transportation and initial accommodation." Patricia stood frozen on the porch, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, horror, and dawning realization of her catastrophic miscalculation. The woman who had spent weeks treating me like a burdensome charity case was watching me conduct business involving more money than she would see in multiple lifetimes. I accepted the leather portfolio from Monsieur Dubois and examined the documents with careful attention. The deed to Château de Montclair was written in both French and English, with official seals and signatures that confirm my ownership of a property that had housed nobility for 6 centuries. The photographs included in the package showed my new home in all its Gothic splendor, with its towers, gardens, and wine cellars that were older than this entire continent. The staff has been retained, Monsieur Dubois explained as I reviewed the papers. The chateau employs 12 full-time personnel, including a chef, housekeepers, groundskeepers, and a wine master who has maintained the vineyard for 30 years. Your private quarters have been prepared, and the restoration work can begin whenever you are ready to approve the architectural plans. Patricia had sunk into one of the porch chairs, staring at us as if we were speaking in an alien language. The mathematical reality was hitting her in waves. If I had purchased a chateau for $78 million, the farm sale had brought in even more than that. The woman she had dismissed as destitute was not only wealthy, but wealthy on a scale that dwarfed anything she had imagined possible. Emma and Sophie had emerged from the house, drawn by the commotion and the presence of the elegant stranger. They looked between their mother's shocked face and their grandmother's transformation with the confusion of children trying to understand adult mysteries that were beyond their comprehension. Monsieur Dubois, I said, signing the final document with a flourish, I believe I am ready to depart for France. My belongings were shipped ahead yesterday, correct? Oui, madame. Everything has arrived safely at the chateau and has been unpacked, according to your instructions. The aircraft is waiting at the regional airport, and we can depart whenever you are ready. Patricia finally found her voice, though it emerged as a strangled whisper. Margaret, wait. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. When I suggested you stay in the outbuilding, I was just trying to help you transition to... I didn't realize that you... I looked at her with the same polite attention I might give to a stranger asking for directions. Yes, Patricia? Is there something you need? Her desperation was becoming more evident with each word. The children need their grandmother. This is their home. You can't just leave us here. What about Emma and Sophie? What about the family? It was interesting how quickly the family had become important to her now that she realized her mistake. For weeks, she had treated me as an unwanted burden, someone to be disposed of as efficiently as possible. The chicken coop accommodation had been designed to humiliate me into compliance with her plans. Now that she understood the true scope of her miscalculation, family loyalty was suddenly paramount. The children are welcome to visit me in France, I replied calmly. The chateau has numerous guest rooms, and I think they would enjoy learning about European history and culture. As for you, Patricia, I believe you have made your feelings about our living arrangement quite clear over the past few weeks. Monsieur Dubois was observing this exchange with the professional interest of someone accustomed to family drama surrounding large inheritances. He had undoubtedly witnessed similar scenes countless times throughout his career, though perhaps not involving chicken coops. Patricia's tactical approach shifted to what she clearly believed was her most persuasive argument. But Margaret, you're 78 years old, moving to a foreign country, living alone in some ancient castle. It's dangerous. What if something happens to you? What if you need medical care? What if you can't handle the isolation? Her concerns were laughable, coming from someone who had just spent 3 days forcing me to live in a chicken coop. The woman who had been planning to ship me off to a nursing home was now worried about my well-being and independence. I appreciate your concern, I said, with the same tone I might use to acknowledge a weather report, but I believe I am quite capable of managing my affairs. Monsieur Dubois has arranged for excellent local medical care, and the chateau staff includes several individuals who are trained in elderly care assistance. Emma approached us hesitantly, her young face troubled by the adult tensions she could sense but not fully understand. "Grandma, are you really going to live in a castle, like in the fairy tales?" I knelt down to her level, my heart aching for these innocent children who had become pawns in their mother's games. "Yes, sweetheart. It's a beautiful old castle with towers and gardens and a library full of wonderful books. Would you like to come visit me there sometime?" Her eyes lit up with the wonder that only children can muster. "Can we really? Can we see the towers? Are there secret passages?" "There are indeed secret passages," I confirmed, remembering the architectural details from the photographs, "and a dungeon that's now used for storing wine, and beautiful gardens where peacocks walk around like living jewels." Sophie joined her sister, equally excited by the prospect of visiting a real castle. Their genuine enthusiasm was a sharp contrast to their mother's calculating panic. These children saw magic and adventure where Patricia saw only the financial opportunity she had catastrophically mismanaged. Patricia made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Margaret, please, let's discuss this privately. I'm sure we can work out some arrangement that benefits everyone. The children need stability, and you need family support. Perhaps we could all move to France together. I could help you manage the property." The audacity of her suggestion was breathtaking. The woman who had tried to force me into a nursing home was now proposing to accompany me to France as my assistant and caregiver. She had apparently convinced herself that her treatment of me over the past few weeks could be forgotten in light of this new financial opportunity. "Patricia," I said with the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to a child, "you have made your feelings about living with me abundantly clear. The chicken coop accommodation was particularly illuminating regarding your vision of our future relationship. I think it's best for everyone if we pursue separate living arrangements." Monsieur Dubois checked his pocket watch and cleared his throat diplomatically. "Madame Whitmore, if we are to make our scheduled departure, we should leave within the hour. The aircraft crew is waiting, and there are customs procedures to complete." I turned to Emma and Sophie, hugging them both tightly. "I will write to you every week," I promised, "and I will send you photographs of the castle. Perhaps during your summer vacation you can come stay with me for a few weeks." "Would you like that?" Both girls nodded enthusiastically, already planning adventures in their grandmother's fairy tale castle. Their excitement was pure and uncomplicated, unmarred by the adult complexities that had made their home life so tense and unpleasant. Patricia made one last attempt, her voice cracking with desperation. "Margaret, you can't just leave us with nothing. Robert would have wanted you to take care of us. What are we supposed to do?" I paused and looked at her with genuine curiosity. "Patricia, what exactly did you think was going to happen? You assumed I was destitute, you treated me accordingly, and you made plans to institutionalize me. What provision did you make for your own future in those scenarios?" She had no answer because she had assumed that whatever meager assets I possessed would naturally fall to her. Her plan had been to inherit the farm property, liquidate whatever she could, and use those funds to support her preferred lifestyle. My actual wealth had never entered her calculations because she had been too arrogant and dismissive to investigate the true scope of my financial situation. "The farm sale brought in $80 million, I continued conversationally. "I used $78 million to purchase Château de Montclair. That leaves $2 million, which I had planned to use for relocation expenses and initial renovations. However, given the circumstances of the past few weeks, I think I'll be donating that money to a charity for elderly abuse prevention instead." Patricia's face went through several color changes as she processed this information. $80 million. She had been in proximity to $80 million and had spent her time trying to force me into a chicken coop. Her miscalculation was so complete, so catastrophic, that it would have been comedic if it weren't so cruel. "Abuse?" she stammered. "Margaret, I never abused you. I was just trying to help you transition to a more appropriate living situation. Forcing a 78-year-old woman to live in a chicken coop while you entertain your friends with wine from her deceased husband's collection might be considered abuse by some people, I observed mildly. Certainly, it would be viewed as elderly mistreatment by any reasonable standard. Monsieur Dubois was taking notes in a small leather notebook, presumably documenting this conversation for his legal files. The international purchase of historical properties often involved complex family dynamics that required careful documentation for future reference. Harold Pemberton's car pulled into the driveway, and I saw my longtime financial advisor approaching with a warm smile and an air of satisfaction. He had clearly enjoyed orchestrating this dramatic revelation, and his timing was perfect for maximum impact. "Margaret," Harold called out cheerfully, "I trust Monsieur Dubois has provided you with all the necessary documentation. The international wire transfers have been confirmed, and your French bank accounts are fully operational." Patricia stared at Harold as if he were another alien visitor. She had met him several times over the years, but had dismissed him as merely the manager of some modest farming investments. The possibility that he had been handling multi-million-dollar transactions had never occurred to her. "Harold," I replied, "everything appears to be in perfect order. Monsieur Dubois has been extremely thorough, and I'm quite excited about beginning this new chapter of my life." Harold glanced around the property with professional interest, taking in the chicken coop, Patricia's stricken expression, and the general atmosphere of family discord. "I trust your temporary accommodation has been educational?" he asked with barely concealed amusement. "Very educational indeed," I confirmed. "I've learned a great deal about family dynamics and the importance of maintaining one's independence at any age." Emma tugged on my dress to get my attention. "Grandma, will you really write to us and send pictures of the castle?" "Every week," I promised again, pulling her close. "And perhaps your mother will allow you to visit me during your school holidays. The chateau has a library with books in several languages, and I think you would enjoy learning French." Patricia was watching this exchange with growing desperation, finally beginning to understand the full scope of what she had lost through her cruelty and miscalculation. Not only had she driven away a multi-millionaire grandmother who could have provided her children with extraordinary educational and cultural opportunities, but she had also alienated the one person who might have been willing to include her in a life of unprecedented luxury and comfort. "What about the girls' education?" she asked, grasping at what she clearly hoped was a compelling argument. "Emma and Sophie need their grandmother's guidance and support. They need family stability." The chateau is within driving distance of several excellent international schools," I replied. "If the girls choose to visit me regularly, they would have access to educational opportunities that are simply not available here. They could learn French, study European history, and experience culture that would broaden their perspectives immeasurably." This information hit Patricia like a physical blow. Not only had she missed out on personal wealth, but she had also deprived her children of educational and cultural advantages that money couldn't buy in their current location. Her daughters could have grown up bilingual, cultured, and internationally sophisticated. Instead, they would remain here while their grandmother lived like royalty in France. Monsieur Dubois consulted his watch again and gestured toward his vehicle. "Madame Whitmore, we really must depart soon. The flight crew has a limited window for international departure, and there are several documents that require your attention during the journey." I gathered my purse and the small overnight bag I had prepared, taking one final look around the property that had been my home for over 50 years. The farmland stretched out in all directions, still beautiful, despite my complex feelings about leaving it behind. This had been a good place for most of my life, but Patricia's treatment had tainted it beyond repair. "Goodbye, Patricia," I said formally, extending my hand as I might to any casual acquaintance. "I wish you well in your future endeavors." She stared at my outstretched hand as if it were a snake. "Margaret, please, don't do this. We're family. We can work through our differences. I made some mistakes, but we can fix this." Some mistakes, I repeated thoughtfully. Patricia, you tried to force me into a nursing home so you could inherit property you assumed was worthless. When that plan encountered resistance, you decided to house me in a chicken coop to break my spirit and force my compliance. These weren't mistakes of judgment. These were deliberate acts of cruelty toward a family member who had opened her home to you and your children. Harold was loading my bags into Monsieur Dubois' elegant sedan, clearly enjoying the dramatic conclusion to weeks of careful planning. As my financial advisor, he had seen firsthand how Patricia had treated me during our various meetings, and he had never disguised his disapproval of her behavior. "The chateau staff is expecting you this evening," Monsieur Dubois informed me as I settled into the leather seats. "Chef Marchand has prepared a welcome dinner, and Madame Rousseau has arranged your quarters according to the preferences you indicated. Tomorrow, the architect will present renovation plans for your review." Through the car window, I watched Patricia standing frozen on the porch, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, regret, and dawning horror at the magnitude of her miscalculation. Emma and Sophie were waving enthusiastically, their excitement about their grandmother's fairy tale adventure overriding their confusion about the adult drama surrounding them. As we drove away from the farm for the last time, I reflected on the strange turns that life can take. 3 days ago, I had been living in a chicken coop, humiliated by a woman who had assumed I was powerless and destitute. Now I was traveling to France to take possession of a medieval castle that had been home to nobility for 6 centuries. The private aircraft was more luxurious than anything I had ever experienced. The leather seats were more comfortable than my furniture at home, and the cabin was appointed with amenities I had only seen in movies. Monsieur Dubois provided me with detailed information about the chateau, its history, and the current staff during our flight across the Atlantic. Château de Montclair had been built in the early 1500s by the Duke of Beaumont, an influential figure in French Renaissance politics. The property had survived the French Revolution, both world wars and numerous political upheavals that had destroyed lesser estates. The current heir, Count Philippe de Beaumont, was a direct descendant of the original builders, but lacked the resources to maintain the property according to modern standards. The staff included Marie Rousseau, the head housekeeper who had worked at the chateau for 20 years, Henri Marchand, the chef trained at Le Cordon Bleu, Jean-Baptiste Moreau, the groundskeeper responsible for the formal gardens, and Claude Dubois, the winemaster who maintained the cellars that contained vintages dating back to the 1800s. Additionally, there were several assistant housekeepers, gardeners, and maintenance workers who lived in cottages on the property. When we landed at the regional airport near the chateau, a vintage Rolls-Royce was waiting to transport us through the countryside to my new home. The Loire Valley landscape was breathtaking, with rolling hills covered in vineyards and dotted with historic buildings that had witnessed centuries of French history. My first glimpse of Château de Montclair took my breath away. The photographs had not captured the sheer majesty of the Gothic towers rising against the evening sky, or the way the setting sun illuminated the elaborate stone carvings that decorated every surface. The formal gardens stretched out in geometric perfection, with fountains, hedgerows, and flower beds that had been maintained according to Renaissance design principles. Marie Rousseau, a dignified woman in her 50s with silver hair and kind eyes, greeted me at the main entrance with the staff arranged in a formal reception line. Each person was introduced with their specific responsibilities and years of service to the chateau. Their pride in the property was evident, and their relief at having a new owner who appreciated their work was touching. My quarters were located in the chateau's east tower, with windows that provided panoramic views of the vineyards and distant hills. The rooms had been furnished with authentic period pieces, including a 4-poster bed that had belonged to an 18th century duchess, Persian rugs that had somehow survived multiple wars, and tapestries depicting medieval hunting scenes that were works of art in themselves. That first evening, as I dined on Chef Marchand's exquisite cuisine in a dining room that had hosted French nobility for centuries. I thought about Patricia's assumption that I was too old and helpless to manage an independent life. Here I was, not only managing independently, but doing so in surroundings of unprecedented luxury and historical significance. Over the following weeks, I established a routine that combined the dignity I had always craved with the cultural enrichment I had dreamed about during my years on the farm. My mornings began with walks through the formal gardens, where Jean-Baptiste would explain the history and cultivation of various rare plants that had been maintained for centuries. Afternoons were spent in the library, a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves containing first editions and manuscripts that were invaluable resources for understanding European history. I wrote weekly letters to Emma and Sophie as promised, describing my adventures in the chateau and including photographs of the towers, gardens, and my new friends among the staff. The children wrote back enthusiastically, sharing their excitement about potentially visiting their grandmother's castle and asking detailed questions about life in France. Patricia's responses to my letters were stilted and uncomfortable, filled with awkward attempts at reconciliation and poorly disguised hints about financial assistance. She had apparently discovered the true scope of my wealth through various sources and was struggling with the reality of her catastrophic miscalculation. Her letters alternated between attempts at emotional manipulation and barely concealed bitterness about her changed circumstances. After 6 weeks in France, I received a phone call from Harold with news that both amused and saddened me. Patricia had been making inquiries about contesting the farm sale, apparently convinced that an elderly woman couldn't possibly have made such a significant financial decision without being influenced by unscrupulous advisors. Her lawyers had quickly informed her that the transaction was completely legal and properly documented, but her desperation was evident in her willingness to pursue such a futile course of action. More troubling was Harold's report that Patricia had been telling people in town that I had abandoned my granddaughters and was living selfishly in France while my family struggled with financial difficulties. Her version of events conveniently omitted her attempts to institutionalize me and her decision to house me in a chicken coop, focusing instead on painting herself as a victim of my supposed cruelty and abandonment. I decided it was time to address this situation directly. Working with Monsieur Dubois, I arranged for Patricia and the girls to visit the chateau for 2 weeks during the children's summer vacation. The invitation was extended formally through legal channels, making it clear that this was a specific invitation for Emma and Sophie, with Patricia included solely as their guardian and chaperone. The visit was scheduled for late July, when the chateau's gardens would be at their most spectacular and the weather would be perfect for exploring the property. I arranged for Emma and Sophie to have adjoining rooms in the chateau's family wing, with a separate suite for Patricia that would provide appropriate privacy while maintaining clear boundaries about her role during the visit. When they arrived, the contrast between Patricia's current circumstances and the chateau's grandeur was immediately apparent. She had dressed carefully for the occasion, clearly hoping to make a positive impression, but her nervousness and discomfort in such elegant surroundings were obvious. Emma and Sophie, on the other hand, were enchanted by everything they saw, from the suits of armor in the Great Hall to the peacocks wandering through the formal gardens. During their first dinner at the chateau, I watched Patricia struggle with the reality of what she had lost through her cruelty and short-sightedness. The dining room where we ate had hosted kings and queens throughout its history. The wine we drank came from grapes that had been cultivated on the property for centuries. The lifestyle I had achieved was beyond anything she had imagined possible for a farm widow from her rural background. Emma and Sophie adapted to chateau life with the flexibility of children, delighting in everything from the servants' bell system to the secret passages that connected various parts of the building. They spent hours exploring the towers, learning French phrases from the staff, and discovering the library's collection of illustrated fairy tales that depicted castles remarkably similar to their grandmother's home. Patricia, however, was clearly struggling with a mixture of regret, envy, and desperate hope that this visit might somehow lead to a change in her circumstances. She made several attempts to engage me in private conversations about the past, offering apologies that rang hollow given their obvious motivation, and making suggestions about how we might rebuild our family relationship. On the 5th day of their visit, Patricia's true agenda became clear when she approached me in the library with what she clearly believed was an irresistible proposal. "Margaret," she began, settling into one of the leather reading chairs with an air of assumed intimacy, "I've been thinking about our situation, and I believe I have a solution that would benefit everyone." I continued reading my book, a biography of Eleanor of Aquitaine, while giving her my polite but minimal attention. "Oh, what sort of solution?" "Well," she continued, encouraged by what she interpreted as interest, "the girls obviously love it here, and they would benefit enormously from growing up in this environment. I could move to France permanently and help you manage the property. Think about it. You need family support as you age. The children need cultural and educational opportunities. And I have organizational skills that could be valuable in running an estate this size." Her proposal was remarkably similar to her earlier suggestion on the day of my departure, but now delivered with the desperate enthusiasm of someone who had witnessed firsthand what she had lost. She had spent several days living in unprecedented luxury, being served by professional staff, and experiencing a lifestyle that made her previous existence seem primitive by comparison. "Patricia," I said, closing my book and giving her my full attention, "do you remember our conversation about the chicken coop?" She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Margaret, I've already apologized for that misunderstanding. I was under a lot of stress, and I made some poor decisions, but that's in the past now. We need to focus on the future and what's best for the children." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I corrected gently. "You made a deliberate decision to house me in a chicken coop because you believed I was powerless and financially destitute. You had no compassion for an elderly family member who had opened her home to you and your children. Your treatment of me revealed your true character, and that character doesn't change simply because circumstances have shifted in my favor." Patricia's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "That's not fair, Margaret. People make mistakes when they're under pressure. I was grieving Robert's death, worried about the children's future, and trying to make difficult decisions about our living situation. I never intended to hurt you. You intended to institutionalize me so you could inherit what you assumed was a modest farm," I replied calmly. "When I resisted that plan, you decided to break my spirit by forcing me to live in conditions that were deliberately humiliating. These weren't mistakes made under pressure, Patricia. These were calculated actions designed to serve your own interests at my expense." Emma appeared in the library doorway, her young face bright with excitement about some new discovery. "Grandma, Madame Rousseau showed us the wine cellars, and there are bottles that are older than America. Can we go see them again after lunch?" "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, grateful for the interruption. "Perhaps Chef Marchand can arrange for some special grape juice tasting so you can pretend to be wine experts like the grown-ups." After Emma skipped away to find her sister, Patricia made another attempt at emotional manipulation. "Look at how happy the girls are here. They deserve this kind of life, Margaret. You have the power to give them opportunities that will change their futures forever. Isn't that worth putting aside our past differences? The girls are welcome to visit me regularly," I said firmly. "I've already discussed with Monsieur Dubois the possibility of arranging for them to attend international school nearby if they choose to spend extended periods here. Their education and cultural development are certainly important to me." "But what about me?" Patricia asked, her desperation finally breaking through her carefully maintained facade. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to provide for them without any resources? You know I can't give them the kind of life they could have here. It was fascinating how quickly her concern had shifted from the children's well-being to her own circumstances. The woman who had been planning to institutionalize me was now positioning herself as a victim of my supposed selfishness. Patricia, you made your choices based on what you believed was my financial situation, I observed. You treated me with cruelty because you thought I was powerless. Now you want compassion and generosity because you've discovered I'm wealthy. Do you see the problem with that approach to human relationships? That evening, during dinner in the chateau's formal dining room, Patricia made what I realized was her final desperate attempt to change her circumstances. She had dressed in her most elegant outfit and had clearly spent considerable time preparing for what she intended to be a persuasive performance. "Margaret," she announced to the table, which included Emma, Sophie, and myself, "I've been thinking about our family situation, and I believe I owe everyone an apology for the misunderstandings that led to our current circumstances." Emma and Sophie looked up from their dessert with the polite attention children give to adult conversations they don't fully understand. They had been enjoying their chateau adventure without focusing on the underlying family tensions that had brought them there. "I realize now that I made some poor decisions when we were all grieving Robert's death," Patricia continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a carefully rehearsed speech. "I was overwhelmed by responsibility and made choices that hurt people I care about. I want to make things right, for the children's sake if nothing else." Her performance was skillful, touching on themes of grief, family responsibility, and maternal concern that might have been convincing to someone who hadn't experienced her behavior firsthand. She had positioned herself as a woman who had made mistakes under difficult circumstances, rather than someone who had deliberately chosen cruelty when she believed it would serve her interests. "What kind of things do you want to make right?" I asked, with genuine curiosity about how she intended to proceed. "Well, I think we should all move to France together," she said, warming to her theme. "The girls would receive an incredible education. You would have family support as you age, and I could help manage the estate. It would be like a fresh start for all of us, a chance to build the kind of family relationship that Robert would have wanted." Emma's eyes lit up at the mention of moving to the chateau permanently. "Could we really live here, Mama? Could we have French lessons and learn to ride horses and explore all the secret passages?" Sophie was equally excited by the prospect. "And we could help take care of Grandma and learn about all the history in the library and maybe even learn to cook French food." Their enthusiasm was genuine and touching, but it was also exactly what Patricia had been counting on to pressure me into acceptance of her proposal. She had positioned the conversation so that rejecting her would appear to be depriving the children of opportunities they desperately wanted. "Girls," I said gently, "you are always welcome to visit me here, and we can certainly arrange for you to spend extended periods at the chateau if your mother agrees. But moving permanently to France is a very big decision that would affect your entire lives." Patricia sensed an opening and pressed her advantage. "It would be the best decision we could make for their futures. Think about the language skills, the cultural experiences, the educational opportunities. They could grow up truly international, sophisticated, prepared for success in ways that would be impossible back home." She was right about the advantages, which made her manipulation all the more skillful. Emma and Sophie would indeed benefit enormously from growing up at the chateau, and their excitement about the possibility was heartbreaking to witness. "There's also the practical consideration," Patricia continued, "of how I'm supposed to provide for them alone. The farm is gone, Robert's insurance money is nearly depleted, and I don't have the resources to give them the kind of life they deserve. Here, they would have everything they need, and more." Her financial desperation was finally being acknowledged directly, rather than hidden behind concerns about family relationships or the children's well-being. She needed my wealth to maintain any reasonable standard of living, and she was willing to use her daughter's legitimate excitement as leverage to achieve her goals. "Patricia," I said carefully, aware that Emma and Sophie were listening to every word, "these are complex family decisions that require careful consideration. Perhaps we should discuss the practical details privately after the children are in bed." That night, after Emma and Sophie had been tucked into their elegant bedrooms with stories about French princesses and medieval adventures, Patricia and I met in the chateau's small sitting room for what I knew would be our final serious conversation about the future. She had prepared for this meeting with the same intensity she had brought to dinner, and her opening statement was delivered with the passion of someone whose entire future depended on the outcome of our discussion. "Margaret, I know I hurt you badly with my behavior after Robert's death. I was stupid, cruel, and short-sighted. I made terrible decisions that I regret every day, but please don't punish Emma and Sophie for my mistakes. They deserve better than what I can provide for them alone." Her acknowledgement of her cruelty was more direct than any apology she had offered previously, but it was also clearly motivated by desperation rather than genuine remorse. She had seen the lifestyle that my wealth could provide, and she was willing to abase herself to gain access to it. "You're right that I was cruel," I agreed. "The chicken coop accommodation was particularly revealing about your character and your attitude toward elderly family members who you perceived as powerless." She winced at the reminder, but pressed forward with her argument. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry. But we can't change the past. We can only decide how to move forward in a way that benefits everyone, especially the children." "Patricia, do you understand why your apology isn't particularly convincing?" I asked. She looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "I've admitted I was wrong and apologized for hurting you. What more can I do? You've apologized because you discovered I'm wealthy, not because you developed genuine remorse for your actions," I explained patiently. "If the farm sale had brought in $50,000 instead of $80 million, you would still consider your behavior completely justified. Your regret is about the financial opportunity you missed, not about the pain you caused." The truth of this observation was evident in her inability to formulate an immediate response. She had indeed calibrated her treatment of me based entirely on my perceived financial value, and her current desperation was purely motivated by the wealth she had discovered rather than any genuine understanding of why her behavior had been wrong. "But does the motivation matter if the outcome is better for everyone?" she finally asked. "The children would have incredible opportunities, you would have family support, and I would have the chance to make amends for my past behavior. Isn't that worth considering regardless of my initial motivations?" It was a sophisticated argument that acknowledged her self-interest, while positioning that self-interest as ultimately beneficial for all parties involved. She had clearly spent considerable time developing this rationale during her stay at the chateau. "The motivation matters because it predicts future behavior," I replied. "You treated me with cruelty when you believed I was powerless, and you're treating me with desperate kindness now that you know I'm wealthy. What happens when circumstances change again? What happens when I become ill or incapacitated and you once again perceive me as burdensome rather than beneficial?" This question struck at the heart of her proposal, and her discomfort with it was obvious. She had no convincing answer because we both knew that her behavior was likely to revert to its previous pattern if my circumstances changed in ways that made me less valuable to her. "I would never hurt you again," she insisted, but her words lacked conviction even to herself. "You would make the same calculations you made before," I said with certainty. "You would weigh my value against my inconvenience, and you would make decisions accordingly. The only difference is that now you understand the potential financial stakes involved." Over the remaining week of their visit, I watched Patricia struggle with the reality that her gambit had failed. She had brought the children to France, hoping to leverage their excitement and my presumed loneliness into acceptance of her proposal. But my refusal to be manipulated had left her without viable alternatives. Emma and Sophie continued to enjoy their chateau adventure, blissfully unaware of the adult negotiations that would determine their future relationship with their grandmother. I spent as much time with them as possible, creating memories that would hopefully sustain them through whatever difficulties lay ahead. On their final day, I presented each girl with a special gift. For Emma, I had commissioned a custom-made jewelry box that played a French lullaby and contained a small ruby necklace that had belonged to the chateau's previous owner. For Sophie, I arranged for Chef Marchand to create a personalized cookbook containing simplified versions of French recipes that she could prepare at home with her mother's help. More importantly, I established education funds for both children that would ensure their access to the best possible schooling regardless of their mother's financial circumstances. These trusts were structured to provide for tuition, educational expenses, and cultural opportunities while preventing Patricia from accessing the principal amounts for her own purposes. The funds will support their education through university and beyond, I explained to Patricia as we reviewed the legal documents in Monsieur Dubois' presence. They will also provide for regular visits to France and other educational travel opportunities. The children's futures are secure regardless of any other circumstances. Patricia's reaction to this news was complex, involving gratitude for her daughter's security mixed with frustration that the arrangements prevented her from benefiting directly from my generosity. She had hoped for a comprehensive solution to her financial problems, but instead received a targeted intervention that helped her children while maintaining clear boundaries around her own access to my resources. "What about my situation?" she asked bluntly. "How am I supposed to manage as a single mother without any family support, the same way you planned to manage when you thought I was destitute?" I replied matter-of-factly. "You made arrangements for your life based on your expectations about my financial situation. Those expectations were incorrect, but your fundamental circumstances haven't actually changed." As their departure day arrived, I felt a deep sadness about saying goodbye to Emma and Sophie, tempered by satisfaction that I had secured their educational futures and maintained my own dignity in the process. They would return to their regular lives with wonderful memories of their grandmother's castle and the promise of future visits that would continue to enrich their understanding of the world. Patricia's final attempt at reconciliation came as they were loading their luggage into the car that would take them to the airport. "Margaret, I hope you'll reconsider your position about our family situation. The children need their grandmother in their daily lives, not just as an occasional visitor. The children have their grandmother's love and support in the ways that matter most," I replied. "They have educational security, cultural opportunities, and the knowledge that they will always be welcome here. What they don't need is to witness further manipulation and conflict between adults who should be protecting their emotional well-being." After their departure, I settled into a routine at the chateau that balanced solitude with meaningful social connections among the staff and local community. Marie Rousseau became not just my housekeeper, but a trusted friend who helped me navigate French cultural customs and local social expectations. Chef Marchand delighted in creating elaborate meals that showcased regional cuisine and local ingredients. Jean-Baptiste introduced me to the intricacies of vineyard management and the seasonal rhythms that had governed the chateau's agricultural life for centuries. 6 months after Patricia's visit, I received news through Harold that she had remarried, choosing a man named Gerald Thompson who owned a small manufacturing business and provided the financial stability she had been seeking. Her letters about this development were brief and formal, focusing on practical arrangements for the children's continued visits to France, rather than attempting to rebuild our personal relationship. Emma and Sophie adapted to their mother's remarriage with the resilience of children, and their new stepfather proved to be a decent man who supported their international travel and educational opportunities. During their subsequent visits to the chateau, They would share stories about their new family dynamic while continuing to develop their appreciation for French culture and language. As I approached my 80th birthday, I reflected on the unexpected path my life had taken from that humiliating chicken coop to the elegant towers of Château de Montclair. Patricia's cruelty had inadvertently freed me from familial obligations that might have prevented me from pursuing this extraordinary adventure. Her assumption that elderly people are powerless and disposable had been thoroughly disproven by my ability to not only survive her mistreatment, but to thrive in ways she had never imagined possible. The chateau had become more than just a home. It was a symbol of the dignity and independence that every person deserves regardless of their age or circumstances. The staff treated me with genuine respect and affection that contrasted sharply with Patricia's calculated manipulation. The local community had welcomed me as a valued neighbor who was contributing to the preservation of their historical heritage. My daily life now included activities that would have seemed impossible during my years of farm drudgery. Morning walks through gardens that had been designed by Renaissance masters, afternoons spent reading rare manuscripts in a library that contained books older than my native country, evenings enjoying wine that had been aging in the chateau's cellars since before my birth. The restoration work on the chateau was proceeding beautifully under the guidance of French craftsmen who specialized in historical preservation. We were returning the building to its original glory, while incorporating modern conveniences that made it comfortable for contemporary living. Each completed room revealed architectural details and artistic treasures that had been hidden for decades under inappropriate modernizations. Emma and Sophie's visits became the highlights of my calendar, bringing youthful energy and American enthusiasm to the chateau's formal European atmosphere. They were both becoming fluent in French and developing sophisticated palates for cuisine and wine that would serve them well throughout their lives. Their education funds were performing excellently, ensuring that they would have access to the best universities and cultural opportunities regardless of their family's financial circumstances. During one particularly memorable visit, when Emma was 12 and Sophie was 14, we discovered a hidden room behind the library that had apparently been used during World War II to hide valuable artifacts from Nazi confiscation. The space contained paintings, sculptures, and documents that provided fascinating insights into the chateau's role in protecting French cultural treasures during the occupation. This discovery led to collaboration with French historians and museum curators who helped us properly catalogue and preserve the hidden collection. Several pieces were donated to national museums, while others remained at the chateau as part of its permanent historical collection. The girls were thrilled to be part of a real historical discovery that connected them directly to the dramatic events they had studied in their history classes. By my 82nd birthday, I had established a foundation dedicated to elderly rights and abuse prevention, funded by the investment returns from my remaining assets. The foundation provided legal assistance to elderly individuals facing mistreatment from family members, supported research into elder abuse prevention, and funded programs that promoted dignity and independence for aging populations. Patricia's reaction to news of the foundation was predictably self-centered, with concerns about whether my charitable giving would affect the children's inheritance prospects. I assured her through our lawyers that Emma and Sophie's educational trusts were completely secure, but that my broader estate would be largely devoted to charitable purposes rather than family inheritance. This news prompted Patricia's most honest communication in years. A letter expressing her regret about the opportunities she had missed through her short-sighted cruelty. She acknowledged that her treatment of me had been motivated by greed and power rather than genuine concern about my well-being, and she admitted that my subsequent success had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about her own character. I realize now that I could have been part of something extraordinary, she wrote. "If I had treated you with the respect and kindness you deserved, we might all be living completely different lives. Instead, my cruelty and assumptions cost me the chance to be part of your amazing adventure. I hope someday you can forgive me, not for my sake, but for the children's." Her letter was more honest than any previous communication, acknowledging her motivations and mistakes without attempting to manipulate me into changing my position. While I appreciated her candor, forgiveness remained complicated by my awareness that her regret was still primarily about what she had lost, rather than what she had inflicted. The chateau continued to provide me with daily reminders of the dignity and beauty that life could offer when one had the resources and freedom to pursue excellence. Every meal was a work of culinary art. Every walk through the gardens revealed new seasonal beauties. Every evening in the library offered opportunities to explore knowledge and culture that had been accumulated over centuries. My relationships with the staff evolved into genuine friendships based on mutual respect and shared investment in the chateau's preservation. Marie Rousseau and I would often spend evenings discussing French history and social customs, while Chef Marchand delighted in teaching me traditional cooking techniques that had been passed down through generations of chateau kitchens. The local community had fully accepted me as a permanent resident rather than a temporary foreign visitor. I participated in regional cultural events, supported local charities, and formed friendships with other property owners who were similarly committed to preserving the area's historical character. My integration into French society had been surprisingly smooth, facilitated by the respect that significant financial resources commanded and the genuine appreciation for my commitment to cultural preservation. As I celebrated my 85th birthday in the chateau's grand ballroom, surrounded by friends from both sides of the Atlantic, I marveled at the transformative power of financial independence combined with personal dignity. The woman who had once been forced to live in a chicken coop was now hosting elegant parties in a medieval castle, demonstrating that assumptions about elderly powerlessness could be spectacularly wrong when circumstances allowed. Emma and Sophie, now young women of 18 and 20, had both chosen to attend universities in France, drawn by their love for the culture and their fluency in the language. Their summers at the chateau had shaped their worldviews and career aspirations in ways that would have been impossible without exposure to international perspectives and historical consciousness. During my final years, I took particular satisfaction in the knowledge that Patricia's cruelty had ultimately backfired in ways she could never have anticipated. Her attempt to humiliate and control me had instead liberated me to pursue a life of unprecedented dignity and luxury. Her assumption that elderly people were powerless had been thoroughly disproven by my ability to not only survive her mistreatment, but to thrive beyond her wildest imagination. The chateau would eventually become a cultural center and museum, ensuring that its historical significance would be preserved for future generations. The foundation I had established would continue advocating for elderly rights long after my death, turning my personal experience of mistreatment into a force for protecting others in similar circumstances. My story had begun with humiliation in a chicken coop and evolved into triumph in a medieval castle, proving that assumptions about age, power, and possibility could be completely wrong when circumstances aligned properly. Patricia's miscalculation had cost her everything, while inadvertently providing me with the freedom to discover what extraordinary adventures were still possible in the later chapters of life. The irony was perfect. The woman who had tried to strip me of dignity and independence had instead freed me to pursue both on a scale that exceeded my most ambitious dreams. Her cruelty had revealed her true character while simultaneously liberating me from obligations that might have prevented this remarkable transformation. As I spent my final years in the chateau's magnificent surroundings, attended by staff who genuinely cared for my well-being and visited regularly by granddaughters who had been shaped by exposure to culture and opportunity, I reflected often on the strange pathways that life could take. Patricia's chicken coop had led directly to French towers, proving that endings could become beginnings when one had the resources and determination to rewrite the story entirely.